Thank you for having me here. I'm honored, I'm proud that I drove all the way from Pacoima. If anybody of you know where Pacoima is, maybe you know of Richie Valens, La Bamba, that's where I'm from. That's our national hero, Richie Valens or Chich Marin. Anyways, I chose these here, these images, because I think they kind of portray what we're talking about, the essence of this presentation, the similarities and the intersections between Chicanos and the Palestinian people. As you see there, Jorge Gonzalez, a leader of Chicanos, an organizer, a hero, and he's walking in front of this mural that says, "To kill is bad enough, but to kill your own gente is to kill la raza." So a revolutionary slogan of unity to Chicanos, to Chicanas. Then on the other one, I tried to find out who that person was, but I could only find the picture online. It's obviously in Palestine, and it says something similar that Chicanos understand. We love our land. We will fight. And I think both of these slogans, I mean, they're both murals, revolutionary murals or slogans in an area where occupied and colonized people live, and they're both giving that message of love. Love, that is what guides us. Love. Revolution is love. Love for your people. It's not hate. I mean, there's people we hate. We hate oppression. We hate, all these systems that destroy and all that. But we hate them because we love way more. I'm a father myself. When my daughter was born and now my son was born, so beautiful. And it reminded me of the beauty of life. That they are worth me dedicating my life to having a better world for them. And as a Chicano, that better world interprets over as Aztlan. That is our better world. That is how we contribute to the human family, Aztlan. Just like our Palestinian sisters and brothers, their struggle, they see their children, and they say, this is so beautiful, it is willing to give my all, every last drop of blood, of sweat, so that my children can live in a free Palestine and live with the dignity that they deserve as human beings. And that's the same thing, a lot of people might try to twist it. That's the same thing our Jewish brothers and sisters said when they were under occupation by that horrible, horrible system of Nazi oppression, and they had the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and those were heroic people that fought to the end so that their children could live a better life with dignity and human justice. So let's clear that up. Because there's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of twisting of reality that is put out there to benefit not us, to benefit not the common person, but to benefit the people in power. We need to clarify that. And a lot of this presentation is what I want to clarify, specifically being a Chicano, being indigenous, to clarify these misconceptions that you might even see on social media, maybe on campus, you hear some of it being said. We need to clarify that because, part of the challenge of us as colonized people, as oppressed people, is like Dr. Mireles was saying, colonization makes the colonized person doubt themselves. Can I really express myself? Am I even worthy of saying anything? Can I tell the world how I feel? Yes, you can. And you have the right to do that. And when we say we're Chicanos, we are saying we have the right to tell the world, this is how I see the world. It's not saying we feel any better or even any worse than anybody, but it's saying this is how we feel, this is how we view the world, this is our place in the world. We just want to be a part of humanity. That is it. Part of the nations, the brothers and sisters of the world. So with that, there's this, I think there's these two images kind of exemplified that. I made them kind of look like a postcard, not exactly, but from Aztlan to Palestine, like a postcard. So acknowledge and gracias. I'd like to thank Dr. Mireles, Dr. Jose Moreno, Dean Didi, all of you for having me here, ¿verdad? Flagstaff and the indigenous people of Flagstaff and La Raza of Flagstaff, the workers of Flagstaff for having me here. So to begin with, so I'm going to go into what I'm talking about, and then I think eventually you'll see why I'm even talking about this. We'll start off with Palestine. The Palestinian Liberation Organization was founded in June 2nd, 1964. The PLO is a front type of organization, which means it is composed of several organizations with similar ideologies and goals. The ideology of the PLO is composed of several organizations unified under the goal of the liberation of Palestine. And I think this is important because, one is to understand what we're seeing on the news. As the people of Palestine understand that they can do nothing if they are not organized. They have been organized. That's how they've been able to resist. It's not individual acts. They are organized, they have organizations, they have the goal of building a nation, of being a free nation, and that's the whole issue with the Zionists, that they don't want them to be an independent nation. Palestinian people know that. So I also would like people here to take some of these ideas that we're learning from them and kind of see how they fit into our struggle as Chicanos and indigenous people, what we can learn from them. So that's their goal. They have those goals. They're explicitly said in all their paperwork and their statements. This here is Article 1 from the Palestinian National Charter, which is the founding document of the PLO, and it's like a Palestinian Declaration of Independence, and it reads, Palestine is the homeland of the Arab Palestinian people. It is an indivisible part of the Arab homeland, and the Palestinian people are an integral part of the Arab nation. So just like Chicanos, we view ourselves as we know that we're a part of a much bigger group of people. Part of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, quote unquote Americas, part of the Latin American peoples, but uniquely Chicanos. So the Palestinian people themselves, they say they know they are part of a much wider Arab people, but they're uniquely Palestinian because of what they are undergoing, the occupation of their homeland. This also here, and I think this is important, this is Article 2, because a lot of times we hear people talk about colonial borders and how can you claim anything built on colonial borders. But that's the history of humanity. But because there's colonial borders does not mean the people living there are illegitimate. This here, and this is the Palestinian people recognize this. Article 2, Palestine, with the boundaries it had during the British Mandate, is an indivisible territorial unit. The British Mandate was the declaration in which the League of Nations gave administrative control of the land of Palestine and Transjordan to Britain. Who gave them the right to do that? Themselves, right? But out of that arose a legitimate people, the Palestinian people. There was no Palestinian nation before that. There was a land that they would call Palestine. There was Arab people there. But even when they were carving it up, Britain, they didn't know they were going to, give some of it to Syria. It was formerly been part of the Ottoman Empire. But that piece they carved out, the Palestinian people, even themselves, say, yes, we are based on these borders that were carved by the colonizer. They were carved by imperialists. But we are a legitimate people. Recognize us. And we will fight to the end for the world to recognize that. We will fight to every last drop of blood and sweat in ourselves for the world to recognize that. So take that into account when people talk about Aztlan. The Palestinian National Charter, Article 8, and this is also important because it teaches us how other oppressed people deal with, we're always fighting amongst each other. What do we call ourselves? Oh, I don't like that group, or I don't like that neighborhood, or I don't like this and that, whatever. But the Palestinian people know that a lot of that stuff is petty, or even if it's important, there's a main thing that we need to focus on. Article 8, the phase in their history through which the Palestinian people are now living is that of national struggle for the liberation of Palestine. Thus, the conflicts among the Palestinian national forces are secondary and should be ended for the sake of the basic conflict that exists between the forces of Zionism and of imperialism on the one hand, and the Palestinian Arab people on the other. On this basis, the Palestinian masses, regardless of whether they are residing in the national homeland or in the diaspora, constitute both their organizations and the individuals one national front, working for the retrieval of Palestine and its liberation through armed struggle. So they are saying there that a Palestinian, first and foremost, is a Palestinian no matter where they are, no matter how young or old they are, no matter what gender, sex, even class. They are Palestinian. And that is why you see these images of heroic young children confronting tanks, because they know they are Palestinian and nothing will change that. They are first and foremost Palestinian, and they will fight. And this next quote cements that. This is a quote from Yasser Arafat. He was the founder of the PLO. It was the chair for a very long time, passed away in 2004. And he says this, and I think this is very important. And they're asking him about, who has won in this war. This was like back in the 80s when he was interviewed for this. And they're asking him, has Israel won? Have the Palestinian won? Who's winning in all this? And he says, I can say that we have defeated the enemy plan that staked all on the dissolution of the Palestinian identity and the Palestinian people. In fact, the Palestinian identity has been reasserted in its most distinct and definite form, and our Palestinian Arab people are not only conscious of their national identity, but also embody it in their daily activities, although more than half of them have been forcibly deprived of the right to live in their land, while the remainder have been deprived of the possibility of expressing their identity. Let me repeat that again, the top part, not the whole thing. I can say that we have defeated the enemy plan that staked all on the dissolution of the Palestinian identity and the Palestinian people. In fact, the Palestinian identity has been reasserted in its most distinct and definite form. So they are saying they have already won because the Palestinian people know who they are. They have won. Nothing can defeat that. Nothing. No matter how many tanks, no matter how many jets, how many missiles from cruise ships and all that, and military forces and sanctions, nothing can defeat the Palestinian people because they know that they are Palestinian. They know who they are, and nothing will confuse them. They cannot break that. They cannot penetrate that national identity, that nationalism of oppressed people that holds them together like iron. I mean, just think about what they're going on, what they've been going through since 1948, I think, or before that. Nothing has broken them. So now on to Chicanos, because this is mainly about Chicanos. Partido Nacional de la Raza Unida, the organization that I belong to, in 1969, at the Chicano Youth Liberation Conference, the same guy you got points for, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez, leader of the Crusade for Justice in Colorado, calls for the creation of an independent Chicano political party and the need for developing Chicano nationalism as an ideological tool for liberation. Although the idea already existed, it is here that Corky and the Crusade call for Aztlan as our homeland. And on the bottom it says the idea that Chicanos originated from Aztlan already existed prior to this Chicano Liberation Conference, but it was first put into text by Jack Forbes, who was native himself, Powhatan Lenape, in a book, or this document he wrote, The Mexican Heritage of Aztlan, 1962. Later on, that piece was added to his book, Aztecas del Norte, which I think anybody wanting to learn about Chicanos should be able to read that book. It's out of print. Supposedly they're gonna publish it again next year. I hope so, because it's a really good book. Founded in 1970, after school walkouts in Crystal City, Texas, La Raza Unida sweeps elections in various towns, challenging the dominant white power structure in place since 1948. And that there, do you know who this is? Anyone know who that guy is? No? Okay, that's Jose Angel Gutierrez. He was one of the founders of La Raza Unida in Texas. That's when he was young. 1972, La Raza Unida Party holds a national convention, drawing in 3,000 Chicanas and Chicanos. Again, that's Corky right there, Jose Angel, and all these other brothers. 1974, since the beginning, the mujeres, the woman, the Chicana participation was central to La Raza Unida Party. Chicanas took several key positions with 36% of county chairs by 1972. Las Mujeres por la Raza Unida and la Federación de Mujeres de la Raza Unida were formed, and they had statewide conference in 1974 in Texas. And I think it's important because we need to make it clear that the Chicana, the woman, has always been central to the movement, and in particular to the party, La Raza Unida Party. You know, I think sometimes we forget to mention that, and they have been there. There's more images of our sisters Irma Mireles, who was a leader of La Raza Unida in Texas. There's a poster of the Conferencia de Mujeres por la Raza, an image from that convention, all women, all Chicanas. And again, it's important to recognize this because there's a lot of misconceptions told out there that women were never there or that women were only cast to the side. No, the Xicana was there. The Xicana was organizing. The Xicana was central to it. As a matter of fact, and you probably heard some of this, at that convention, the women did walk out. They walked out because they said, we are a part of this organization, but we're not just here to make the tamales and take notes. We're here because we're equals with you. We think, we organize, we're out there just as much as you are. But they didn't do it saying we're going to separate. They did it saying, this is our organization. It's called La Raza Unida, not Los Hombres Unidos. And I think that was great because that solidified what the partido is about. A people. La Raza is everybody, and I think that's important to say it in that manner because we've heard it in other ways, where they just try to fracture the raza, fracture our people and say, oh, the women didn't want to be a part of this because it was this, this, and that. Yes, those elements did exist in the movimiento. They existed in society in general, but the women in it said, we are a part of this. We were talking about liberation and Aztlan and Xicana power, Chicano power. That means everybody, not just you. Since the beginning, there was no ideological definition of who or what La Raza Unida stood for. This began to cause a split between those that believed all Chicanos, all that Raza had to do was vote and run brown candidates, and those that understood that we had to completely determine our own destiny. As a people, in other words, build for self-determination, that we decide for ourselves. So there was a split, because when La Raza Unida started, and I know some of this because my dad was one of those people, there was no ideology. There was no central idea of what are we doing. It was just like, no, let's just get more people registered. We just need more people registered to vote. We just need more candidates to run that are brown, and then that's it. And then there was people saying, well, that's not all we need. We need our organization that has our own ideology and is guiding us. And the thing about ideology is, sometimes you hear people say, you don't need ideology. But even saying that is an ideology. Ideology is just your ideas. What guides you, what makes you make the decisions in your life is the way you see the world. That's your ideology. Everybody has an ideology. Every organization has an ideology. Every institution has an ideology. So La Raza Unida was saying, well, we need to have our own ideology. What are we trying to even do? Just register more people to vote, and that's it? Is that really going to change our conditions in the barrios, in the campos, or wherever we're at? No. So you started having that split. In 1975, at the Puerto Rico Libre Conference in Mexico City, Mexico DF, Jose Angel Gutierrez, who would never admit to this, stepped down as chair at the request of the Congreso de Aztlan, which was like the central group. And at that meeting was Juan Jose Peña, and he was elected chair, and Maria Elena Martinez as vice chair. And I know this because my dad was one of those people that went to his room, they knocked on his door and said, hey, we got to meet, man. He let them in, they met, and they told him, you got to step down because, you only got your own favorites doing everything, and that's not the way a party is supposed to work. We need to be based on principles and ideology. You just can't be choosing and picking your own favorite buddies to do everything. So he stepped down. Again, he will not admit to that, but there are people there witness to that, and that's how these two people became leaders. It is in the 1980s that La Raza Unida matures into a serious revolutionary nationalist organization. It defines its ideology as Chicano revolutionary nationalism guided by scientific socialism, based on science, not just utopian ideas. They develop relationships with other peoples in struggle, domestically and internationally. Genaro, my dad, Genaro Ayala becomes the chairman. Ayala makes developing Chicano revolutionary nationalism a prime focus of the partido. We need an ideology. And there was very few organizations back then that really had any ideology or were just trying to mimic other struggles around the world and saying, oh, we need to apply the exact same thing here. You can't do that. You can't, it's like the way you live in your home, it might be similar to other people's, but you can't say the way I live is the way you should live. That's kind of crazy. So they made developing our own ideology based on our own reality a prime thing, because then you can build off of that. If you don't have that base, then you're just copying and picking and whatever, and you're not making something solid. And there's these images here. That's my dad right there at African Liberation Day with the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, some of you might have heard of him, was a part of this organization. There again is my dad. In Mexico, with the Partido Socialista de los Trabajadores at their General Assembly. So the Raza Unida at this time was traveling everywhere, meeting with all sorts of people, going to Nicaragua, going to Cuba, making these ties domestically here with Puerto Ricanos, with African peoples, other revolutionary groups, native organizations. So taking self-determination as a serious task, it is also during this time that the Partido PNLRU, that was their official change or addition to the name, develops a working relationship with the International Indian Treaty Council, which still exists and is recognized by the UN. The International Indian Treaty Council supports the creation of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo project. Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was the treaty signed with Mexico when the United States ended their invasion of this land, and the occupation continued, and it's still here, but ended the armed war, formal war, and formally recognizes Chicanos as indigenous to the spiritual land of Aztlan, as one of many indigenous nations that the United States has warred against and broken treaties with. Don't believe me? Here we go. This is a letter that I personally have, and it was sent to my father. You can look up that address there, but you won't find us there anymore. I was written by Mr. Bill Wapepa. He was the director of the International Indian Treaty Council back then. He was Kickapoo Nation. And part of it says this: I wish to express our commitment to an ongoing relationship of mutual solidarity with La Raza Unida Party. AIM, the American Indian Movement, and the International Indian Treaty Council wholeheartedly support the Chicano struggle for self-determination, which La Raza Unida Party represents. We see it as one of the indigenous struggles for sovereignty and self-determination in this hemisphere. Again, that goes against some of the stuff that you'll be hearing on social media about Chicanos and indigenous people and Chicanos claiming this and that. That was not even an issue back then. Not that we need anybody's recognition, but our own people, our own indigenous nations, from which many Chicanos descend from, had already recognized Chicanos as part of them, as part of these struggles fighting for the land, fighting for self-determination together with all other indigenous peoples. That was not an issue back then. This is another short document, or front page to a document that I have from the International Indian Treaty Council, and this is just a little part of what it reads. In recent years, the International Indian Treaty Council has sought a means to bridge relations to include the Chicano indigenous people among the family of nations. The utilization of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo project as a catalyst for reunification, listen to this language, has helped toward this purpose. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo project is an ongoing research and development component of the IITC since 1980 in Fort Belknap, Montana, at the 6th International Indian Treaty Council Conference. At that time, the General Assembly of the International Indian Treaty Conference unanimously acknowledged the Chicano indigenous people and the spiritual land of Aztlan. That's from our native family, our native First Nations family. And then I include this quote from this sister, Marta Harnecker. She was not Chicana. She was from Chile, actually, and she wrote, if you guys Google her, she wrote a lot of pamphlets. They're mostly in Spanish. Some of them are translated, which she would break down a lot of, complex subjects for the working class in Chile and Latin America. And she said this, which is the reason we're talking about this. She said, it is necessary to study the history of our countries, to know the specific characteristics of our social formations, to study what defines our economic structure, the forms in which different relations of production are combined, which relations dominate, what are the strong and weak points of this structure, to study the ideological structure, the dominant ideas among the masses, to study the structure of power, the internal contradictions of this power, etc. This study of our concrete social formations must be realized through the gathering of the greatest amount of data concerning this reality, critically analyzed in light of the general principles of Marxist-Leninism in order to obtain correct conclusions. You cannot just base yourself on something you heard online or a friend or whatever, and you have to study. You have to take things with that seriousness that you would take any other science. You study reality, and that's one of the points that I'm trying to drive here is this idea of Aztlan. It's not just something that we pulled out of nowhere. It's coming about, through material conditions. There was another man who said this, another historical figure, who said this in very short terms. You might know him. No investigation, no right to speak. So you don't investigate something, be quiet. I'm not saying that to you guys. I'm just saying in general. There's a lot of stuff on social media. There's a lot of stuff out there that is just insane, and these people don't know half of what we're talking about here. But they're making conclusions. They're making conclusions without studying, without doing any of this. So they have no right to speak. And that is why in 1980, the PLO invited delegates from La Raza Unida party to meet in Beirut, Lebanon. That's a picture. It's online. If you Google La Raza Unida party Palestine or Arafat and La Raza, Chicanos, whatever, any of those combination of words, you will find that. RUP delegation meeting with Palestinian Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat in Beirut, Lebanon, 1980. This young man here in the back, that's Daniel Osuna, who is our current treasurer, and still part of La Raza Unida party, which gives me a lot of pride to know that La Raza Unida has, in our organization we have people that are elderly, we have people that are young, you're all age, people my age in the middle, I still try to consider myself a little young, but I can't deny it. But yeah, so we have this organization, just like the Palestinians, that spans generations. We've been building for our people for generations, and I'm proud, that my father is a part of it, my tia, my mom, obviously, as well, and older people that I know, and I'm proud to say, that my daughter and son are already members, whether they want to or not. No, I know they want to. But, there's younger people that are members, and, we're building for the love of our people, a new future. This is a quote from Rebecca Hill, a sister that was one of the delegates. We felt that we both had the same fight. They learned about our struggle that Chicanos were being thrown out of their homeland. So they invited us on a fact-finding mission so we could come back and tell the world that there are two sides to every story, because we've only heard one side, As a matter of fact, that's why they're trying to ban TikTok. As funny as that may sound, because TikTok, social media, you can't just base everything you learn off of TikTok, but it's helped a lot of, especially younger people, know more about what's happening in the world, Palestine in particular. Because the news will not let you know that, the mainstream news. This is a quote from Daniel Osuna, who was there again, and he said two things that Arafat said, because I asked him, what did he talk to you guys about? You guys met with him? Wow, but what did you guys talk about? And he says there's two things that he remembers that Arafat said. One, we need to remember that people are the ultimate resource, not money. And two, we need to break the barrier of fear. We have so much fear. There's so much fear. Fear, as colonized people, as oppressed people. What can you learn? What should you not be learning? What can you know about? What should you not know about? Where can you go? Where can you not go? We need to break that fear. What can you imagine? Just talking about Aztlan and Palestine, these are things that bring up fear in a lot of people, bring up fear in a lot of Chicanos. Even saying Chicano sometimes brings up fear, but why? Let's break that fear. We are trying to build something that will not only benefit our people, but benefit humanity. But we need to break through that fear. Not be scared of these ideas. Not be scared when you hear words like revolutionary nationalism, socialism, communism. What are these ideas? Why can't I learn from them? Why do I have to wait to this of this age to learn of them in higher education? Why am I not learning about myself and the world when I'm younger? Why? Let's break through that fear. Let's break through that fear. So Chicanos, like Palestinians, are a people displaced of their land by a settler invasion. Chicanos developed out of the U.S. invasion of Mexico and sections of the indigenous people, some already identifying as Mexicans, some not, at that point still residing here after the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. After U.S. occupation of the northernmost half of then, what was Mexico, the U.S. begins land theft of native nations who had resisted Spanish occupation, and some even resisted the nascent Mexican government, they were basically still criollos. Criollos was the Spaniards that still were born here. The U.S. also begins land theft through coercive legal means, such as taking land grants from people who held them. And I give you this example of where I live. Today it's a very, very affluent part of the city of Los Angeles called Encino. Maybe you guys have heard of it. There's all these movie stars that live there. Well, it's named Encino. Xicana is actually the original name. That's the name of the tree. Xicana, los encinos, oaks. And this is a quote from the website of the Tataviam Nation, which is the tribe of the area where I live, San Fernando, which is the northernmost part of the city of Los Angeles. And it says, Los Encinos State Historic Park is located at the native village of Xicana, meaning the place of the oaks, from which over 75% of the Fernandeño Tataviam band of Mission Indians descends. The natural spring provided a year-round source of water for our ancestors for thousands of years. In the Mexican period, our ancestors received the Rancho Encino land grant under Mexican trust and protection. However, the land was lost just several years later in the American period due to sharp business practices of a neighboring Spaniard named Vicente de la Osa. His name was in Spanish, he was obviously a Spaniard, he was white. Today, you can visit the historic Adobe Garnier Building, natural spring water, and see the well-known traditional trade route, now known as Ventura Boulevard. Probably heard of that boulevard. And that's from the website, and that's showing, how a lot of the land was taken by coercive legal means. And a lot of the people, the line between Mexican, Chicano, and native has been very blurry, but the colonizer attempts to make those very well defined so that the indigenous people are separated even more than we are already. Again, there where I live, my family has been there for a very long time, and they've known people that are Tataviam, and a lot of them they have been Chicanos as well, of course, because they're from there. They spoke Spanish, they were Catholic, they ate frijoles and tortillas, they still do, but the colonizer makes it very. They want to really define that difference. Oh, you're no longer Mexican or Chicano, you're Native American. Why can't they be both? Or why are they even American? They're native people, and why are we any different than them? We're still traveling on our own land. But yeah, that's how, a lot of that land was taken. And this is a quote again from Aztecas del Norte, which I think shows a bit of what I just mentioned. Again, a very important text that you should read. And it says, Analco, which is a place, a town, the birthplace of the Chicano. On August 15th, 1680, armed Native American rebels of the Tano, Tewa, Taos, Picuris, Jemes, and Apache nations entered Analco, the Mexican, Nahuan or Aztec barrio, next to Santa Fe in New Mexico. A Tano leader met with Governor Otermin of the Spaniards and told him that the rebels carried two banners, one bearing red and the other white. The red symbolized the war which the Spaniards could choose, while the white symbolized the peace with which would prevail if the European invaders agreed to abandon New Mexico. The Indian freedom fighters asked that all classes of Indians who were in our power be given up to them, both those in the service of the Spaniards and those of the Mexican nation of that suburb of Analco. He demanded also that his wife and children be given up to him, and likewise that all Apache men and women whom the Spaniards had captured in war be turned over to them, inasmuch as some Apaches who were among them were asking for them. And then it says, we must be very grateful that Otermin, that's a Spaniard, that wrote that down because it tells so much about the history of the Chicano and the ancient unity of La Raza Indígena, the indigenous race. Here, and this is an important lesson when we're talking, when people talk about, oh, you're not Chicano, or you can't say you're Chicano, oh, this is Chicano, that is Chicano, that's not a Chicano, this is a Chicano. Here, we not only see that the Pueblo and Apache freedom fighters were concerned about the liberation of their Mexican brothers from Spanish tyranny, but we also see that the Indian town of Analco was already pan-Indian, with Apache, Pueblo, and Mexican servants and slaves all living together under the common yoke of the European oppressor. Is it not from this common oppression that the Chicano has been born? An Indian with no tribe, an Indian of many tribes, or a mestizo born of the rape of his Indian mother? Is that not what Chicanos are born from? Chicanos are not just Mexican Americans. We've had Chicanos that are from tribes. We've had Chicanos that are part white. We've had Chicanos that are part black. We've had Chicanos from Central America. We've had Chicanos that are Filipino. All the new people living under the common yoke of European oppression. Is that not what Chicanos are born from? A new nation, a new people. Okay. And how do we skip? There we go. Okay. You might recognize it or not. This is actually a few years old. I think it's from 2011. That is a map of where our people, Chicanos, I don't say Hispanic because we are not from Spain, where Chicanos, except for this part here, we'll exclude this part, where Chicanos, most of us reside within the confines of the United States. Is it a coincidence that we're becoming the vast majority in this area, together with our native sisters and brothers? That is not a coincidence. We are not making that up. This is a quote from Juan Gonzalez, who's on Democracy Now! Maybe you all have heard of Democracy Now! It's a radio program. And he said this after Trump was defeated. And with this, I'm not saying vote Democrat or Republican. I'm not saying that. But there's this message here that he recognized in regards to politics. And he said, and what has happened now is that there is a new brown belt voting bloc that is developing in the Southwest that includes Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, and very soon Texas as well. So there's a group of people there with a common political interest. And of course, they mentioned California because California always goes Democrat, supposedly, Again, we're not making this up. And this is, as you can see there, 2023 U.S. Latino GDP report. U.S. Latino, what do they mainly mean, is the Raza, what I call the Raza. The source, International Monetary Fund. We are not making this up. And these are quotes from that document. And it says, if Latinos in the U.S. were an independent country, that's them saying it, the researchers found their GDP would be the world's fifth largest. The world's fifth largest, outpacing even the United Kingdom, France, and India. Among the 10th largest GDPs in the world. The U.S. Latino GDP grew at the second fastest rate across 2020 and 2021. Only China's GDP grew faster. China's a world power. Despite being only 19% of the U.S. population, Latinos were responsible for 39% of the growth of U.S. real GDP during 2020 and 2021. That is them saying that. That is not, Chicano studies, ethnic studies, anything. That is them saying that. Economic power. They try to tell us that we need them. But from this, it looks like they need us. Do we know that? Okay, so enough of this. What do they explicitly say? Our enemy. And by our enemy, yes, we mean these people that rule over us. What do they exactly say? Maybe some of you recognize this despicable person because he is a Zionist and he's a leader of Zionists, not because of anything else, because of that. This guy from Brooklyn, actually, who said this in a book that he wrote in 1993. He said this. Listen to what he says. The United States, and he's talking about Palestine, right? The United States, partly talking about Palestine, is not exempt from this potential nightmare. In a decade or two, the southwestern region of America is likely to be predominantly Hispanic, mainly as a result of continuous immigration from Mexico. It is not inconceivable that in this community, champions of the Palestinian principle could emerge. These would demand not merely equality before the law or naturalization or even Spanish as a first language. Instead, they would say that since they form a local majority in the territory which was forcibly taken from Mexico in 1848, the War of 1848, they deserve a state of their own. But you already have a state, it's called Mexico, would come the response. You have every right to demand civil rights in the United States, but you have no right to demand a second Mexico. This hypothetical exchange may sound far-fetched today, but it will not necessarily appear that way tomorrow, especially if the Palestinian principle is allowed to continue to spread, which it surely will if a new Palestinian state comes into being. That's from this person, Benjamin Netanyahu, who's the prime minister of that horrible, fascist, genocidal state of Israel. He's making the comparison to Chicanos without saying Chicanos or Aztlan. This here is from Samuel Huntington. He wrote a document called the Hispanic Challenge, which is, it said that document and the ideas of this guy is what helped a lot of the Trump movement blossom. Blossom, right? And Samuel Huntington was not just some guy writing. He was one of the founders of the Trilateral Commission. He worked under the President Johnson administration. He was a high up there in government, think tanks and all that. He said this. Okay, again, this is them saying this. This is not a Chicanos. Chicanos have been saying the same thing for a long time, but this is them saying this. The persistent inflow of Hispanic immigrants threatens to divide the United States into two peoples, two cultures, and two languages. Unlike past immigrant groups, Mexicans and other Latinos have not assimilated into mainstream U.S. culture, forming instead their own political and linguistic enclaves. Then he goes further on in that document. No other immigrant group in U.S. history has asserted or could assert a historical claim to U.S. territory. Mexicans and Mexican Americans can and do make that claim. Almost all of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah was part of Mexico until Mexico lost them as a result of the Texan War of Independence in 1835 to 1836 and the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 48. Mexico is the only country that the United States has invaded, occupied its capital, placing the Marines in the halls of Montezuma, and that's from the Marines anthem, and then annexed half its territory. Mexicans do not forget these events. Quite understandably, they feel that they have special rights in these territories. Unlike other immigrants, Boston College political scientist Peter Scarry notes, Mexicans arrive here from a neighboring nation that has suffered military defeat at the hands of the United States, and they settle predominantly in a region that was once a part of their own homeland. Mexican Americans enjoy a sense of being on their own turf that is not shared by other immigrants. They are saying that. They recognize that. Here's the tweet from that guy. President Trump is right. I built a wall along Israel's southern border. It stopped all illegal immigration. Great success, great idea. I mean, what else can make it clear of the intersection of our struggles? This here is, I took a screenshot of this very, very, what is that called? They even had a word for it. You know when they black out stuff, so they want you to read it. Censored document. There was another word they used for it. I found it on the CIA website. You can actually look up stuff on their website. I know that sounds scary, but one day I was like, oh, F it. I'm going to look up what it says under Chicano. And all the stuff came out. And I find this, right? And I'm reading it, and I'm like, whoa, this is the CIA saying this. And it's only, the document has more pages, right? But they're all blacked out, and they're missing. It only has this part here. And this is from the CIA website, Intelligence Digest, June 1981. Intelligence Digest, you could Google that. It was a journal available to the CIA and other intelligence agents around the world. And this is a highly censored and the only piece available to this story. And in yellow up there, you can see they mention the PLO because they're talking about Palestine and Ireland, who also has a struggle for national liberation. Northern Ireland, who've been fighting against British colonialism. Um, and it says this, and I won't read the whole thing, but this part right here, listen to what they are explicitly saying. The CIA. We have for some inconsiderable time now warned about the politicizing of the Mexicans within the U.S. and the claims for lost and stolen Mexican lands. And he goes on about, so you will not be unduly surprised to learn that a Washington, D.C. school board official has asked that one of the American-held hostages in Iran, this was during the Iran hostage crisis supposedly, be released because he is a Chicano, and that Chicanos are Mexicans who have lived under the yoke of U.S. imperial aggression and occupation since the land was stolen from Mexico in 1836 to 1846. For 200 years, the Latin American countries have experienced the same kind of U.S. domination and control that Iran has experienced between 1953 and 79. As fellow victims of U.S. greed and racism, Iran and the Latino community must learn more about one another and stand together. I mean, look what they're saying. We have for some considerable time now warned about the politicizing of the Mexicans within the U.S. And then he goes on about, talking about Ireland and showed how Mexico could claim Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, together with Wyoming, Colorado, and Kansas, and the Oklahoma Panhandle. And it goes on more about here. And we're not talking about Mexico claiming anything, but we're showing there how they fear that the Chicano people, the indigenous people, become politicized within the United States. They have a fear of that. And this document, that's where it ends. Like there's all these other pages and it just goes on about other random stuff happening, not random things, but unrelated things to this. They don't want to let people know what they were talking about more there. This here is from a Playboy magazine interview. I didn't know Playboy had, good articles, but I guess they do, or they did. July 1978, they interviewed William Colby, who was the director of the CIA back then. And this is what William Colby had to say when they asked him what was the single greatest threat to the United States. He said this in a Playboy article. Playboy article. And I quote, "The most obvious threat is that there are 60 million Mexicans today, and there are going to be 120 million of them by the end of the century. There are 7 million or 8 million Mexicans who live in the United States today, and of the extra 60 million who will be around by the end of the century, which we've already passed that, there is no way to keep a good 20 million of them from living in the country. We can reinforce the Border Patrol, and they don't have enough bullets to stop them all." That's the director of the CIA saying this. It's not some Chicano on the corner with a sign shouting, That's him saying that. So, the Chicano, Mexicano, La Raza, and the Palestinian people are two separate peoples with similar histories of resistance to occupation. Chicanos, like the Palestinian people, are indigenous peoples born as distinct and relatively new nations by the carving of colonial borders upon their homelands. Like the Palestinians, the Chicano struggle for self-determination can cause a serious blow to U.S. imperialism. Palestinian independence would mean the withering away of Israel, which would signify the waning of U.S. hegemony in the Middle East. Chicano indigenous independence in Aztlan would signify the withering away of the U.S. settler state domestically and U.S. imperialism internationally. Imagine what independence, imagine, don't be afraid of these ideas. Imagine what these independence struggles would mean in the world if they were to come to fruition. Both Chicanos and Palestinians are condemned to violent oppression and genocide, either physically or culturally, in order to maintain the status quo. Attacks on Chicano ethnic studies, gentrification, anti-immigrant hysteria, the prison industrial complex, ICE, Border Patrol, police departments, etc., all serve to, in one way or another, subjugate La Raza to colonial authorities and erase our national identity and consciousness. That's the whole reason that happens. That's the whole reason that exists, to control us, to control indigenous people, You know, when they separate our families, how many Chicanos have not, their families been separated by the prison industrial complex? How many Chicanos' families have not been torn apart by colonial laws of immigration? Because who tells them that who is a quote unquote immigrant or not? How is an indigenous person an immigrant? That makes no sense. You know, that's them enforcing their colonial view, the same way they do in Palestine. Palestinian people have to go, they can't just cross over to another part of their land. They need to have if they even can, have a specific ID to go over to another part of Palestine. The same way they have our people here. You can't just walk around, you know, someone go from what is today considered Mexico and just go on the other side of their land. You can't just do that. You know, there's tribes whose lands are divided by that border. You know, they can't just walk on the other side of their own land because of colonization, because of imperialism. So we have a common enemy and a common struggle. Gracias. Yo en la Raza Unida.